Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Kong, Skull Island, starring Tom Hiddleston, Samuel L. Jackson, Brie Larson, Gene Tian, Toby Kebbell, Jason Mitchell, John Goodman, and John C. Reilly, and directed by Jordan Vogt Roberts. Now, I remember going to the theaters twice for this thing, and my first experience was in IMAX, and the second viewing was for with my mother in a regular theater. But it was a big screen, admittedly. But what do I think of it? It's about to be the same as what I'm about to think of it now. Let's get into it and you'll see what I mean. We open with Somewhere Over the Pacific in 1944 as we see an American soldier and a Japanese soldier fighting for survival on Skull Island until King Kong shows up and intervenes, and we see old footage, and we'll know who the American soldier is later in the film. We move forward to 1973 with Bell Randa, played by John Goodman, and his Monarch team's partner, Houston Brooks, visits a Senator Willis about a missing island that happens to be Skull Island and gets help from Vietnam soldiers led by Preston Packard, played by Samuel L. Jackson, as they're recruited to James Conrad, or they recruit James Conrad, played by Tom Hiddleston, and photographer Mason Weaver, played by Brie Larson, as I'm liking the introduction of these characters. And the only characters I don't necessarily care for is the soldiers, except for Packard, because it's Sam Jackson. Because they don't matter in this movie, and the acting is pretty bad at times. They learn about the island by Brooks, and the cinematography I wasn't very impressed with throughout the movie. Even when we get to Skull Island, the team goes in Skull Island, as Packard says, hold on to your butts like he did in Jurassic Park, and go through a storm, and they get to in Skull Island, and it looks fantastic on screen. And this movie is the best in this movie, and it's the best looking scene in the movie. And they encounter, or scenes, I should say, and they encounter Kong as Kong attacks the helicopters. And that action sequence of Kong versus the helicopters is a great action sequence, as it felt very exciting. Everyone has crashed, and everyone except for Packard, Bill, James, and Mason flip out from what they saw. And Bill explains how monsters exist, and Packard wants to hunt down Kong. Meanwhile, a giant wild animals show up just like any King Kong film, and I like the special effects as they look fantastic for a B monster movie. A giant bug with very long legs attacks the soldiers, and they cut the legs off with their knives. And I'm actually very entertained by this movie as a popcorn entertainment B monster movie with some great effects, and the acting is at times bad, but sure, but I'm having lots of fun with it at this point. James Mason and other soldiers are encountered by natives, and we see the soldier we saw in the opening scene named Hank Marlowe, played by John C. Reilly, as he's the most entertaining in this movie, unlike his comedies. And I have fun with this character, as he's funny. Meanwhile, Kong fights with a squid that ends up as his food, while Jack Chapman, played by Toby Kebbell, watches. And Toby Kebbell is also doing the movements on Kong. And like Andy Serkis, his movements are anything on anything looks absolutely great. Hank shows James Mason and others about the legend of Kong and how his parents were killed by skull crawlers and how they come out from the soldiers bombing his home. And I like how John C. Reilly narrates how Kong became the king he is despite he's a teenager. When I get to Godzilla vs. Kong, Kong will be an adult. And I like how this movie explains it. Hank thinks of an idea of getting himself, James, and Mason, and others out of Skull Island with a boat, which will probably work for the climax, but I'll get there. Mason once finds an animal stuck on a helicopter. I think it was a buffalo or something, I forget. As Kong picks it up and encounters Mason, as he knows she's not a threat like people with guns are. And I felt intensity of and I felt the intensity of that scene, which is a good thing for a monster movie. Hank, James, and others with Mason put the boat together. Meanwhile, Chapman is encountered by a monster that looks like a piece of log and is killed by a skull crawler, which I didn't feel bad for the character, and I like we get to know some of the characters despite their good and they in this that they don't matter kind of way. But I like watching Tom Hiddleston, Brie Larson, John Goodman, and Samuel L. Jackson and John C. Reilly on the screen together. What am I talking about? As a few of them are in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Hank has a sword from the Asian soldier from the beginning of the movie and takes it with him, and he wants James, Mason, and others to go on the boat to get off Skull Island as they leave the village of natives. And I like that Hank has an arc that he wants to see his wife and son. They got a hold of Packard, and a pack of flying creatures grab a scientist and kill him off. And honestly, I didn't care at this point because all he did was whine the entire screen time that he was in. They catch up with Packard and they go out to try to find Chapman as they don't know he's already dead. And Packard has already lost his mind at this point. And they go in a no section. And James finds Chapman's dog tags as he finds out he's dead while Bill gets eaten by a skull crawler. As this movie's action is a lot of fun and entertaining for a B monster movie, and I like Tom Hiddleston with the sword as it makes him look like a badass. Packard desperately wants to kill Kong with his soldiers while James takes Mason, Hank, and many others back to the boat while James and Mason go look for the river, and at nighttime they find Kong at the end of the river, and I like how beautiful that scene looks and how Kong realizes half of them are not a threat. Packard and the soldiers make a giant fire trap for Kong while James, Mason, and Hank try to save Kong, but he falls down thanks to the fire with gasoline as the soldiers set up the bombs, and Packard wants the bomb to explode as a skullcrawler arrives to kill Kong off before Packard blows up everything, and he's squished to death, which was pretty funny in a comedic way. At daytime, one of the soldiers sacrifices himself to get killed by the skullcrawler as it chases the humans, and Kong fights the skullcrawler. And this is the best action scene throughout the movie the with the Kong versus the helicopters is in the whole movie is Kong versus the Skullcrawler as Kong uses a branch stick as a weapon while Mason uses a flare gun to kill the Skullcrawler in the eye. And Kong stabs the Skullcrawler and accidentally knocks Mason in the water. And Kong kills the Skullcrawler by chains and as a weapon and grabs Mason out of the water. And Kong is wounded pretty badly as he pulls the tongue out of the Skullcrawler and lets Mason and the others go free on the boat. And we see more helicopters coming for Kong as he's prepared for a fight. Another branch of helicopters, which is a badass way to start credits rolling. During the credits scene, we see Hank returning home to his wife and son, which is a nice way to start the credits. And after the credits, we get James and Mason are captured hostage by the Monarch group, led by Brooks, and tells them Kong is not the only king, as it sets up for Godzilla vs. Kong, and it was an awesome way to set up that fight. And the climax kept me entertained, as did this whole movie. Now it's time for the rating. I'll give this movie a 7.7 out of 10. It was a lot of fun for a B monster movie, and it kept me entertained throughout. I like some of the characters, but the best character is Hank, aka the John C. Reilly character. But other than that, the other characters were good, but the soldiers remained the weakest characters in this movie. it's a pretty good way to set up Godzilla versus Kong, as this, like any Kong or Godzilla movie, is a guilty pleasure, except for the Kongs with Jeff the Dude Man Bridges and the Peter Jackson ones. But this is the second best Kong compared to the 1930s film. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me, and next time I will be back with Godzilla, King of the Monsters. And until next time, let them fight.